Well, you're tuned into the Zealous Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros, and this week's no exception. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and I've got Tom Barbeau on the show with me tonight, return to play coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. We're going to talk all about RTP, but before we get underway, if you need continuing education workshops or units, you can go to my website, rockysnyder.com. If you're an athletic trainer, chiropractor, physical therapist, strength coach, personal trainer, we've got it for you. You can also check out podcasts, blogs, and a whole bunch more at rockysnyder.com. Satanta College is a place to go if you're interested in a Master's of Science in Performance Coaching. They've got 3 other tracks, one in Applied Sports Biomechanics and Movement Science, Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology, and lastly, Sports Injuries and Return to Performance Management. If you want to get more information, go to satantacollege.com. Enter RS10 for 10% off tuition today. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Hit the subscribe button, and here we go. Well, Tom, the NFL season's just about officially over. By the time this airs, we will have ourselves a Super Bowl winner. My hometown team of the Patriots, I've been loving life for many decades of a dynasty now. But you're down in Carolina working with the Panthers. First of all, welcome to Zealous before I get underway, and thanks for taking time out to be on the show.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome. I can't wait. And it's my hometown team of the Patriots too. But
That's right.
no longer actually funny story starting right away. We had joint practices with them. So we played them in the preseason last year. The year before we had joint practices. And there's a brawl on the sideline of joint practices. And then
Really?
absolute brawl. There's always fights during joint practices, but there's a brawl. So one of the guys gets kicked out, a guy on each team gets kicked out, and then practice is almost over. So the other assistant strength coach and I are walking to the weight room because the Patriots were really nice. They let us use their weight room to train. I'm walking there, and there's this little kid from Boston who tells me to F off. And I just looked at him and was like, oh, I'm home. This is how it's supposed to
Oh,
be.
that is great. Yeah, I tell people that women that turn 70 and older have to, by law in New England, at least Massachusetts, wear a Red Sox baseball hat. It's just the way it is. Like every little old lady is a Red Sox fan, and everybody has some type of license plate on their vehicle with one of the New England sports teams. It's just the way it is. That is the region. When you think of diehard sports fans, I don't think it gets any harder than New England.
I agree. New England, maybe Philly.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, we're not going to talk about them at all
No,
right now.
no,
In fact, I don't even want to tell you who I'm rooting for, but
no,
I can't believe I'm doing it. But
no.
anyway, you land at the Panthers, man. First of all, congratulations. I know give us your official title with the Panthers because you've got 2 roles that you're playing right now.
Yeah, so I'm the return to play coordinator. I work hand in hand with the lead of return to play from the medical side, Harrison Group, who's new this year from Seattle. So he and I handle all of the return to play together. It's fantastic. We have a great relationship, and we just go out on the field together during practice or whenever we have our guys and have a great time and work with them. It's a really good relationship. So it's that, and at the same time, an assistant strength and conditioning coach. So
That's
that's what I've
beautiful.
been
Now,
doing for the start.
that's what you were as the start is assistant strength conditioning coach.
Yes. And then I started taking over a little bit more return to play. Um, the gentleman who was our director here when I first got here, Kent Johnston, was in the NFL for 25 plus years. He was the head strength coach with the Packers with Brett Favre. He was in Seattle, and his son played for us when I was at Baylor and actually played for us a little bit in Carolina, which is how we knew him. And he took me under his wing, and he does a ton of return to play. That's now that he's retired in Texas, he has a return to play business where he helps kids that are rehabbing. Uh,
Oh, sweet.
so
Okay, we're
I just
definitely
learned
gonna
everything I could from him.
So you're going to share a lot of that because I would love to hear it. Yeah, I'm loving the return to play aspect of sports and kind of filling in the gap between medical and training staff, which has been really needed. And even though there's been some really solid attempts, I think they're really getting a good foothold on it these days more and more with guys like you filling in the spot, but having your foot on both sides of the doorway. But before that, schooling. I know you grew up not far from me, just over the border from Massachusetts into New Hampshire in Plymouth. You went to Plymouth State for a little while. You went to Baylor
I actually
Give me a
I
rundown of
went to
that.
McGill University in
Oh,
Montreal.
McGill. Oh,
Yeah.
so you do speak Quebecois too? You know French?
No, my
Uh,
mom and dad are both from Montreal. They both went to McGill, so then they moved to the US 4 years before I was born. Um, so I'm a dual citizen, very exotic, and
nice.
and that so I was and my grandfather went to McGill. I was never gonna go anywhere else in my mind, so I went there. I played a few
And
years
what
of
did you study?
basketball.
What did you do
Phys
at
ed.
McGill?
I was a phys
Phys
ed
ed. Okay.
major for my
And
undergrad.
basketball.
And then yeah, I played basketball, and then I went the year after I graduated. Then I was the strength coach at Plymouth State for 1 year. My aunt's actually the athletic director there, so I knew the right people. And
Dude,
my
nice to
dad is
have a connection.
yeah, exactly. And my dad is a downhill ski racing coach, and he's a strength and conditioning coach. So when you ask how I got into it, there was never going to be another job. Um, and
So
then
your parents were breeding. They weren't raising a family. They were just breeding. I
this
get it. Okay.
Uh, my mom was a swimmer at McGill, and my dad played football and was a ski racer. And they both taught skiing. My aunt, who's the athletic director, was a ski coach. Uh, my grandfather on my dad's side was a ski racer for the Canadian national team. And so, yeah,
Okay,
they're
I'm curious. What's your home mountain? Is it
Waterville
Loon? Is
Valley.
it Waterville Valley? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
I grew up on the road that goes into Waterville Valley, about
Uh,
5 miles from the town. My parents run the Waterville Valley Ski Academy. So
right on.
yeah, so there I've been skiing since I was 17 months old.
And for the listening audience not familiar with New England ski resorts, Waterville Valley is like when you think of skiing in New England, that pretty much is at the top right there. Aside from the Notch in Conway or whatever, if you want to get extreme, but in terms of resorts, Waterville Valley was where pretty much everyone would go. Very cool. Okay, so you go to McGill, you play some basketball, and your legacy basically in McGill, but also in strength conditioning. And that was cool with you. It didn't feel like you were being pressured into this. It was just like, hey, I'm loving this, or what?
Yeah, from from the time I was little, that's just what we did. I didn't even really know any different, whether it was sport coaching or strength and conditioning. Like my high school jobs, I would always coach at basketball camps. I thought I wanted to be a basketball sport coach, and I just didn't have a great college basketball experience. And I realized that the sport coaches have to make decisions basically based off who they help. I don't know if they have to, but they choose to because it's the best for what they view as the best for the team. And they end up
Sure.
treating people better than other people. And
Mm,
strength and conditioning coach, as the performance coach, you have the ability to give everybody your best because I mean, really, the sport coach should too, but it doesn't happen. But you really have the ability to give everybody your best to improve them. It doesn't hurt you in any way. You don't have to treat people differently. Um, and that was something that I would say really resonated with me. My last 2 years at McGill, I stopped playing and I went and coached at a French private school just on the South Shore called Collège de Rocher Saint-Lambert. And I would coach basketball and I was the strength and conditioning coach. So,
right.
so what we would do is my dad's background, he learned from a Russian gentleman in Boston named Igor Burdenko. And the training is not weight room based like traditionally we think. It's way more movement based. It is, moving in every direction, forwards, backwards, all three planes, different speeds. If you're doing strength stuff, it's more body weight, single leg squats, tons of stuff like that. Tons of work on the pelvis, the core. Um, he wouldn't call it the core. He calls it pelvis stability, but I'm going to say for general terms that. But so what I did is I was coaching the basketball and I would just train all the kids more in that style. But it works great for sixth graders to 12th graders. You have no problem doing that stuff. They get better like crazy. And it's just general
Sure.
athleticism. It's, a lot of the stuff is what you see now on when you're looking at long-term athletic development and you see Twitter videos of people doing stuff or Instagram. Like that's what I was doing with these high school kids. And then also coaching basketball at the same time and trying to work on my Quebecois French because the point guard might not speak English, and that was a real challenge.
That's fantastic. I love that you get the European flair in there too, because unlike other programs that were very heavily weight room based, those are great lifts. There's nothing wrong with them, but they do tend to be very strict in terms of the mechanics, very robotic. They have a tendency to isolate more than integrate, and force transference is not something that is really stressed in a lot of those program designs. And of course, people have heard me say this before, but they were borrowed from three competitions, not from actually studying how the body moves, but powerlifting, Olympic lifting, and bodybuilding, which is not necessarily carrying over towards like either basketball or football specificity. So that's really cool. So, and I can see how you could carry that into the realm of return to play quite naturally, like holding on to those tenets that you built up and experienced and going, oh yeah, yeah, that's good, coach, but we should probably consider doing this. Is that kind of how it rolled out for you?
Exactly. What what some people might call a dynamic warm up, we very quickly turn into a training session or a return to play session. And the it doesn't mean that you don't have to have intensity. We might do an exercise slowly, then we'll do it faster, then we'll do it as fast as they can, which to some extent might be faster than looks good coordinatively. And, often I find strength and conditioning coaches want it to look right. So they'll tell the guys to slow it down. But if you're like trying to improve motor learning, trying to improve rate coding, what's like you get the sweet spot when you start making mistakes. So when you get a kid going absolutely as fast as they can after they've done 20 reps, 10 slow, 10 medium, they'll look nice. Give them a little rest, let them rip. You're going to get in that sweet spot of learning, and you're going to see like movement quality improvement. Um, and you get a
Oh,
huge variety of exercises by doing that. Um,
brilliant. So basically, you shake that chassis until the bolts start falling off. And
yes,
then the,
that's a
the
great example.
natural inclination of adaptation and strengthening is going to kick in even better by doing it that way, is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And we're given a ton of
Okay.
variety. So um, I love Snyder, and he's a great guy, and
Who's a great guy?
he's a great guy. So
Funny as hell. Oh my gosh, talk about a dry sense of humor. That brother can make you wet your pants and without cracking a smile. Anyway, yeah, tell me more.
he always says you can have complexity or you can have intensity, but you can't get both. And that's something I really believe in my return to play and in my training. And I think that this is where the Burdenko method and this background for me blends in perfectly, because it's like, all right, when it's time to be intense, we're going to sprint and we're going to run with sleds and whatever those things are, right? Or when we go in the weight room, we'll do a heavy lift. But my accessories and my warm up and my other stuff, I can give so much variation. I'm getting both. And I think that that's really something that I think about all the time is how do I do those things? How do I give them both? How do I make sure that I'm giving them intensity, but I'm also giving them a wide berth of movement? It's a lot of the times I try to come up with movements that they've never done before. Um, Growing up, my dad was always making up exercises. So within the session, I'll make up an exercise. We'll do something and I'll watch him do it. And I'll be like, all right, now we're going to try it this way. And it might look bad. The coordination might be crazy, but again, after a couple reps, they figure it out. And my population now that I work with, these guys are motor geniuses. So
Yeah.
if you can challenge somebody who has never fails and make them think about something coordinatively, like that's a win.
Like, do you ever get one of the guys going, see, Tom, that's crap, man. You're just making this up. That's not really an exercise.
All the time. I get the oh hell nah, Tom. That's always the joke. That's Hey, here we go. Today we had a
So,
return to play guy in the weight room, and we made up an exercise, some kind of like a pull up with leg movements. It was like a seated pull up because he's rehabbing a knee, and he just started laughing at me. And then because he's rehabbing the knee, he kind of stands up funny. And our Harrison, our PT, is like, "Can you stand up like that?" So I'm like on my side, I keep my legs straight like he does. I do a push up, I stand up. Another one of the injured guys goes, "Why did you just do that?" I'm like, "I don't know. I got to figure this out. We got to see if we can do it. We're learning how to move over here. I know you're professional.
I
We're
love
learning
that.
how to move."
Okay, okay. So I want to dive into the return to play, kind of the whole spectrum there and your philosophies with it. But first, how did you land the job with the Panthers? How did that come about?
A lot of luck. Um, No, so
I doubt that. I think it was just you opened doors of opportunity when you were aware of it. But okay,
the,
we'll chalk
so
that answer up to modesty.
so when I was the 1 year at Plymouth State, and there was a gentleman named Mike Gittleson who had been at Michigan forever as the football strength coach, and I met him and I said that I wanted to get my master's degree and I wanted to work in Division I sports. And really, I thought I wanted to work in basketball. I didn't think, or Olympic sports. I didn't think I wanted to work in football. And he knew a couple people at a couple different places. He knew a lot of people at a few different places. So I had the chance to go and intern at Michigan in Olympic strength and conditioning, or I could go to Baylor and get my master's degree. I applied online and I was going to end up being a GA where I taught classes, got a stipend and got paid, didn't have to pay for anything. And then he knew the strength coaches at Baylor for football, so I would be able to intern with them.
Nice.
And it turns out the strength coach that I interned for is Jeremy Scott, who's still my boss now.
Ah,
And so I interned for a year and a half, and I got my master's in that year and a half. Then they hired me. I was there full time for 8 months. And then Matt Rule was our head football coach at Baylor. He got the job with the Panthers, and he brought the three gentlemen who were my bosses, and they brought me for this. That's he hired Kent Johnston, who I talked about at the very beginning, to be the director of wellness. And Coach Kent had a vision where I had a split role. At the time, I was like 27, so I didn't really know anything about anything, but I knew I wanted to do it, and I would learn a lot, both from the players and these guys as my mentors. And 5 years in the NFL, you figure some stuff out, that's for sure.
okay. The how about the big buckets? Like even if there's just one that comes to mind, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch. In the course of this 5 years of learning, gaining experience from mentors and just experience from an everyday perspective, what are the big buckets that you learn in regards to return to play, return to performance?
Um, hmm. So, sure, I got a cough. I'm gonna pop my cough drop in. Um,
I'll match you. There we go. Okay.
um, well, so one of the things that Coach Kent really always talked about that hit home was spinal rigidity being the enemy of movement. And, we always think of like, oh, you hear Dr. Stuart McGill say you can't shoot a.
Stu Miguel.
Yeah, exactly. And Coach Kent completely believes not the opposite. You got to be able to turn it off and on. And so we ended up being very influenced by the Aldoa crew, Guy Voyer, and
Mhm.
our team chiropractor is a gentleman named Nevin Markle who learned under Guy Voyer and has those osteopathic beliefs. And we brought in a couple practitioners and have learned that stuff. We were very heavily influenced by animal moves, animal movements, animal flow. So stuff in our
Sir.
warm up, which mixes in then perfectly with what I learned from my dad with all this movement variety. Uh, and then, so I'm such a believer that, well, I know that when you learn things, right, there's a framework and you just scaffold what you've learned to your framework.
Sure.
And it's really hard if what you learn that is the center of your framework is incorrect. You're kind of screwed because then you got to relearn all these things and you got to figure out where everything attaches. And where I think I'm really lucky is the whole time growing up, I was always told that pelvis stability, balance, and balance not as in standing on one foot, but balance is in forwards, backwards, the ability to control the pelvis, knowing where it is in space, not just like not keeping a neutral pelvis and it not moving, but being able to move in and out of anterior to posterior tilt. All of these things was the absolute most important thing in sport performance. That's what I was told from my dad from the time that I was 5 years old. And at the
Okay.
time, whatever, 6 years old, right? And at the time, you're like, sure. And then listen to the Aldoa guys, and everything is about where the pelvis is and driving length through the spine. But all of the movements are coaching the pelvis. Then we brought Jordan Mendegucha in, the Spanish hamstring researcher. The guy is brilliant. And it was phenomenal, like probably one of the best uh, professional development consultants we've had, especially for hamstring research. And everything he talks about is how anterior pelvic tilt increases strain on the hamstrings. And how do we create exercises that create pelvis stability and, create awareness around the pelvis? And I'm just like, oh my God, all these people are saying the same things. How lucky am I that this framework might have been correct? We still don't know for sure, but it might have been correct. So even what have I learned since? I would say that what I learned first at the very beginning is luck, also luck, because I could have been told something completely wrong. Could have been told that walking on your hands is the most important thing, and clearly, right? Um, so yeah, like I would say, bringing your Dan in was something that was huge for what we learned. Um, we also very fortunate. Coach Kent is very good friends with Dan Path, so
Sure.
Dan has been around a ton from the time I was at Baylor. He's come in here as a consultant. So I look just, how to coach, what we're looking at, developing a coaching eye. We'll have return to play guys and I watch their move and all right, what do I think is wrong? Where am I seeing leaks in the chain? Where am I seeing joints that aren't working properly? But then Dan might be, a couple times a year, he's standing there right next to me watching two and talk about well, if I see two things and he sees three, but if we saw one of the same, well, that's a win for me because I'm getting closer because
Hell yeah.
he sees it all.
Yeah.
So
After you watch bodies move for so long, there comes a time where you cross this imperceivable threshold where suddenly it's like somebody took some blinders off and you see it at another level. And it's going to happen if it hasn't happened already. I mean, for me, it happened about 5 years ago during COVID, where I could only see people on the screen. And as you were talking about the pelvis, one of the screening processes, not to get too deep into what I do, but some of the dynamic screening is I want to see what the quality of tilting like is on the pelvis. How well do they anteriorly tilt versus posterior? What is the lateral sway or translation like? What's lateral flexion as well as rotation, right? Give me all three movements because then that's going to give me so much information up and down the chain. It'll be at least a starting point that we can start to hunt down the clues either up or down and so on. And you
you're
start
speaking
watching
my
it, and then
language.
suddenly you're like, holy cow, did I, I'm seeing things up in that shoulder that I wasn't even aware of. Or, it's just more
Yes,
becomes revealed, I guess I'll say with that. And you're on it sounds like you're on an amazing path.
I think you're right. At first you just watch it and you have no idea what you're looking at, right? And then you start to watch one foot or one leg and you're like, okay, I see how this is moving. And then I would say I got to the point where I knew things were wrong. Like I would watch it and immediately, okay, something's not right here, but what isn't right? The where I'm getting better, but again, I'm 32, there's a lot of time to keep getting better, is when it's okay, this is the driver. Like I can see the hips wrong, I can see the shoulders wrong, I can see the foot's wrong. What's first? And
Yeah.
that's the I guess the beauty or yeah.
Dude, I love that stuff. And you got to start somewhere. So you might as well just throw a dart at the board and get going and then see if, okay, is that it? Combine that with their health history, their injury reports, all those things, because it could be that when they were in high school, they got broadsided and they almost dislocated that right hip. And they have been creating solutions or strategies around that injury, even though it healed many years back, it still created a pattern that they have been utilizing as their solution for so long that it's now creating problems in the opposite shoulder or down into the knee or wherever. You're like, oh, so getting all of that insight while you're watching starts in my mind creating like this hypothetical story. Like, okay, if this happened, could that very well help to explain what I'm seeing now? Is this
Absolutely.
making sense?
Absolutely. And in a
Love that.
sport like football, it's so brutal. You have every single
Everybody's
guy has
injured.
five. Yeah, everybody has five of those. And it's, huh. Well, last week you
Hmm.
got hit like this, and you got hit like this 3 years ago. So is this the same problem? Is this something that's recurring? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Oh,
it's
that is so cool. So, you've had some really great influences, of course, starting with your own parents and the coaches that you had up north. But to be surrounded and to have some of these consultants coming in is pretty fantastic. And this is your fifth season in this position, or did you build this after you got there?
I built this after I got there. I built it. It became. Um,
Sure.
so yeah, I just finished year five. So when I first came, I was just an assistant strength coach, and Coach Kent, who was the director of wellness, did all of the not all of the, he did the return to play though. And I was just his assistant. So at first I just watched, because when I was at Baylor, I started doing some of the return to play during practice. In college, it's a little different. Like you have a pit and guys are there working because you have to make them miserable and you have to make it so that they don't want to practice. Not necessarily, but that's how it goes.
Sure.
Um, so what we would do is we would like cycle guys through would go into the indoor and we would do general movement and specific movement and all these things that were, I would say, more return to play based. And we would just cycle guys through. So that's when I started doing it at Baylor. And then when I started with the Panthers, now you don't have to have the pit. You just get to do return to play. So it's beautiful. And I would help Coach Kent. And at first I would just watch and we would do it together. And then we would split the groups up and he might tell me what to do, but I would I would do it with him and then I'd have my own group doing what he said. And then I started to have more control over it and I started to be able to pick what we were doing. And then in the second year, a lot more, I had more control of what we were doing. In the third, fourth years, I really, it was me. Coach Kent left, he retired. Um, and I really became the one doing it, deciding what we were going to do, building it out. Rob Panarillo, who is a PT, AT strength, Rob's the best.
Sure.
Rob
Yeah.
came in and he took the job that Coach Kent had. So he's another great mentor, especially weight room wise. Talk about somebody that went and learned from the Russians and has, you know, started all these PT clinics. He has so much experience. Um,
Great presenter also. I've seen him present
oh,
on more than one occasion.
phenomenal speaker. Rob is a great man. Um, he so he came in and just was super supportive. Could not have been more supportive of what I was. It was amazing. That's part of the reason we had such good consultants come in too, because he loves that stuff, right? So whenever there was somebody that Coach Kent was the same way. Whenever it's amazing, gentlemen who are older strength coaches, they all learn. That's why they're still there, or older PTs. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's what I would like to be as I continue to get older. Um, but yeah, so then Rob was super supportive and just gave me advice, but let me have ownership. And then this last year was the first year with the official title as return to play coordinator.
Right on. Yeah. I kind of want to circle back for a second. And I think that Stuart McGill is one of the most brilliant minds and brilliant researchers when it comes to spines and spine health. And yet, Um, I've always been at odds. You know how there's something in the back of your head that's just scratching at you, going, okay, well, I know that two bones come together in the space in between, and we call some an articulation or a joint, and that's where movement should occur. And now we've got this spine that's comprised of 24 segments, not including the sacrum and the coccyx. 26 if you want to include those, and there's space in between those, and there's a lot of people that are really trying to tell me it should be more like a tree trunk and not be able to move. And we're designing all of these plank and static stabilizers to keep the body still. And all the heavy lifting that we're doing, we definitely want to keep stable through the trunk. But then when I watch players play on a field, it's not like it's just their arms and legs moving. They're side bending and rotating and extending and flexing. And it's just like, you know, for you were speaking earlier about getting some central philosophy and scaffolding out. And I was one of those in the 90s who built that central understanding improperly. And there was a lot of unlearning and therefore relearning of different information that had to occur. And talk about shaking the fundamental foundation of your belief system and having to start from scratch. That was a huge undertaking. So I commend you for not having to go through that process, for being somewhere right in what seems to be true center and building out from there, because it's a lot easier. I'll say that. And kudos to Dr. McGill. Nothing bad with there, but there is two elements to this. There's spine health for rigidity, but also dynamic stability and mobility. So anyway, I don't want to harp on it too much, but
No,
I
I,
just
I
thought we
think
should
you're
talk.
correct about that though. It's also what you said where when you're under heavy load, it is a thing that you want, but not every sport is weightlifting. Now,
Yes.
playing offensive line, you might want to have some stiffness. Like having
But not if I'm a
motion
running
and
back,
having
not if I'm
rotate.
a, yeah, not if I'm a wide receiver, not if I'm a
Correct.
corner, right?
So we need some creative programming to train those gentlemen differently in at least in our building, because they
I love
definitely
it.
they are not playing the same sport.
So I get this feeling, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but with your approach with return to performance, return to play, RTP, is that you are not having protocols necessarily based on a specific surgical procedure, injury, or trauma necessarily. And what I mean by that is historically, there's ACL protocols for return to play, which they're still in effect, but I have a feeling that you just see that as being part of it, and you've got to look at the entire picture. I want to see not only was that an injured knee, but it affected every joint, every tissue in the body when that trauma occurred. And yes, we can spend all the time focused on that knee and rehabilitating it, but it changed how the ankle and the foot were behaving on both legs. It changed how the spine was behaving, the shoulders. So you're going to take a much more comprehensive approach and not just focus on, hey, we got to get that, we get the goniometer out, get the isokinetic testing out. When it reaches these points, they're good to go. That's
You're
not your play.
absolutely correct. You are
Yeah.
absolutely correct. So, there's two ways that I think about exactly what you said. Two separate things that are exactly the same, but they're separate in this case. One is when the athlete is back healthy, what are they going to have to be able to do? How do I work backwards from there? So, one piece of technology that we use is SpeedSig, which is Jason Weber out of Australia. And you take in our case, Catapult GPS unit, you wear it
Okay.
on the lumbar spine in a belt directly on the spine. And when they run and move, the GPS unit moves. And he has figured out with like real scientific backing, statistical evidence, because Jason is a very large, bald Australian strength coach, but he's also a statistical nerd at heart, and he did all the coding himself because he was a director of performance and had a problem that he needed to solve as he watched people run. But he has all these metrics like um, he can get based off where the GPS unit is. He has a proxy of thigh angular velocity. He has a proxy of vertical force, horizontal force, running economy. He's able to figure out stride length, stride frequency, flight time, all of these things based off just the GPS unit on the back. It's amazing. But when we have these injured guys that run with this on, we start to see patterns in the injuries, or in some cases, we see new patterns pop up on certain players. So, all right, this guy does not do a good, has poor punch. Punch is vertical force production. When I run, essentially, I should hit the ground and the unit should stay in the same place. If I have poor punch, I get a sink, right? So the more movement, the worse.
Wasted energy. Yeah.
Yes.
Inefficiency. Sure.
Well, if I just am recovering from a knee and my quad isn't strong, then I won't have great punch. But how many other things are then cheating around my quad? I'm probably going to get extra hip lock. I'm probably going to get my hip higher. So now I have more space to apply to create force as opposed to just being able to whip it into the ground. Whatever these things are, there's a lot of things that
Sure.
are
I might have elevation of my shoulder. I might actually have spinal flexion up to the opposite side. Anything to give me that lift, right? Or
exactly.
that push. Sure.
So now I know that that's where it's going to be at the end. So at the beginning, how do I start fixing these problems? And it's with very specific, I mean, in some cases, very specific exercises, in some cases, not so specific. But I already know on week 4 that I'm going to have to fix a problem 9 months from now. I might as well start now. So you might have just torn your ACL and you might not be able to do a ton of stuff movement wise, but you can probably sit on the ground and do some Donnie Thompson butt walks and start to get your spine and your back and your spinal engine working. So we might do those in our lift, and we might do pull-ups for the low ab because I know that your quads are shut off, everything's shut off. Or shut off is not the right word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Underactive. And so the hip flexors, all of these things are getting jacked up. So I'm gonna start training those right now. We're gonna work on posture and all of these things as soon as possible so that where we get at the end is where we're gonna need to be. At the
You
same
know
time,
what I love? I love the fact that you're not hunting down the muscle. You're not hunting down one particular muscle and saying it's all the fault of the glute medius or multifidus or whatever, whatever muscle you come up with. You're actually looking at movement, mechanics, force production and the level of production. If there's a dip here, then I'm going to look here. And then you might say, okay, what is the movement? Just like you said, what's the movement that's missing? How can I integrate that into the program? Can it be multiple joints? Can it be complex? Or is that too much for them to handle because there's too many compensatory outcomes and they're not getting to the root movement that I'm trying to get to? So I got to knock this down almost to an isolated fashion. I'll take the legs out of it, I'll get them on their butt, and they'll start moving back and forth in that manner because if I bring the legs into it, it doesn't happen. So
Yep.
I'm loving what you're saying right now.
And then the other side of it is we need to train every quality still. We need to train the entire rest of the body because you might have a knee, but your hip is fine and your ankles are fine. So let's get creative. And that's where this exercise variety and all of these things are because we can still move fast and we can still achieve a stretch shortening cycle and we can still be strong and we can still improve mobility and we can still be balanced and focus on our pelvis position, all of those things. So it's not time to as you said before, just worry about a knee. When I'm rehabbing everything else, and the knee is going to come along because especially, and then when we get to the end, we're going to be in a way better place.
Yeah, well, and especially if you look at if we could separate contact from non-contact injuries, that there's a big difference between the two. If I've got somebody with a non-contact injury, more often than not, I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't have any statistics, but anecdotally, with my own experience over time, more often than not, that injury site was trying to be the solution to the overall mechanical problem that their body was creating due to something going on in their system. And say that ACL that tore when they were juking some player on the pitch or on the court, that gave out because it had been trying to do way more than it should when other areas weren't kicking in, right? So compared to like if somebody just gets taken out side like clipped and their ACL blows out, that's a completely different scenario. I'm sure some of the approach is going to be similar, but you've got to address the individual at the same time.
Yeah, we're always trying to find where the leaks are, as we said at the beginning, right? We're finding
Yeah.
where the leaks are,
What
finding
other
what's not
tools do you
working.
use? Sorry to interrupt, but what other tools? You already told me about one tool that you
Yep.
use.
You'd say we have force plates, so our guys will jump. We use Nordroid groin bar. So you're rehabbing a hamstring, and we'll, um, I test isometrically and then test eccentrically on there as we're rehabbing it, just for general numbers.
Okay,
I wouldn't say, oh, the Nordic is the be all end all, right?
I'm
But
so glad you're saying that.
but if a hamstring can't put out 350 newtons of force, it probably means something's wrong at the tissue level. Or if a hamstring comes in and this guy, a guy pulled his hamstring 4 days ago and it's our 5 days ago, it's our first session in the weight room. And isometrically, he puts out 500 newtons of force. That doesn't make sense. Is this really
Mm,
a hamstring? Maybe it is really a hamstring, but what else is happening? Is the back involved? Is there sciatic involvement? Your Dan Mendegucci's crew his research group had an article that came out last year about NFL football players and hamstring injuries. 30% of NFL hamstring injuries have sciatic involvement. So there can be more there. It gives us good questions to unpack beyond just I need a Nordic to make my ham. That's not the be all end
right.
all. But
No, we don't want to train just for increasing a number, especially if it's not a movement that is indicative or specific to the athlete themselves. I mean, you're not going to have a lot of football players where somebody's laying down on their feet and they have to be on their knees and fall forward toward the ground.
a-
No,
absolutely not. But I would like the tissue to be able to handle some load.
heck
Now,
yeah.
even what we're seeing too is the the Nordic greatly biases bicep femoral short head, and all these injuries are long head. And then they're going and looking at muscle cross sectional area, and the long heads is atrophied in comparison, and we're seeing these. So those are other problems that come with it. So again, the exercise variety, the variation, we're still going to do like the divers and slider rollers and all sorts of band kicks, all sorts of stuff. We're going to run a hell of a lot as we're rehabbing a hamstring. We're going to run as fast as possible, as early as possible. And again, because it's specific to what's going to come back, right? Specificity is still very important, um, especially in the case of like soft tissue, where they're going to be back playing fairly shortly.
Hmm. Yeah.
Depending on the grade, it's not going to be that long, depending on the amount of time that they're out.
Right on.
I don't know if I talked myself in a circle or if that made sense.
No, 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 you didn't. You didn't. You just but my ADD brain saw a squirrel out the window and I went with hamstrings when you said that. And I'm just thinking, the hamstring's one of the one muscle that crosses more than one joint. And when you look at the behavior of a muscle that crosses multiple joints, you'll find that it doesn't behave necessarily the same way that the anatomy books tell us. It's not all lengthening and shortening at the same time. In fact, when we're walking or running, the distal part of the hamstring is going to lengthen while the proximal part is shortening, and vice versa. There's rarely ever a time in human movement where you're going to get origin and insertion moving toward one another, toward center or away from each other. They're both going to be moving in the same direction, only one at a faster speed to create length at one end or the other. So when I see things like the isometric, or not isometric, sorry, but the single joint movements, they typically disregard the behavior of the tissue itself just for simple force production, which has a place. But in terms of like what we're talking about, specificity, return to performance, it's not a very big place at that.
Yes, it's just making sure it can tolerate the forces it's going
There
to
you
have.
go.
But we're providing the coordination in it might be 95% of providing the proper coordination and 5% of providing the load. Uh, just to make sure that it can tolerate. It's almost more of a test to say, hey, can you tolerate this? Um,
Okay.
on what you said too,
Go
though,
ahead.
the hamstrings even have multiple nerve innervations, right? So
Yes.
that's Derek Hansen has the 10 by 10 protocol, right? Where he has guys back running from hamstring pulls 3 days post strain, 2 days post strain. And it's so that you restore the coordination. A lot of the reasons it feels
Proprioception, mechanoreceptors, they gotta be fired up.
exactly. So I'm uh, I don't exactly follow the return to play periodization that Derek does, like with that much frequency, like the day after day after day. But I believe the things that he's saying, and I still, our first day post hamstring strain, we're probably going to run 3 by 10 yards. It might be up a hill, it might be whatever doesn't hurt, and it might be slow, but we're still going to do it just to start retraining the coordination and the
Yeah.
specificity of how the hamstrings are going to work.
When it comes to inversion sprains, I find the same thing. I mean, for most issues like that, but inversion sprains, the quicker I can load into that foot in a proper sequencing, the quicker the recovery is. And with the help of some little foot wedges to encourage proper movement of the rear foot or the forefoot or even the toes, and proper loading, like pronation mechanics, getting them to properly load into it compared to how they unfortunately loaded into a fully inverted state, it has resounding effects for just about everybody. It's amazing. So glad to hear that. So
I
okay,
definitely, I
yeah,
definitely listened to you talk about foot wedges on a podcast years ago. And I had no
uh,
idea until you just said that. I just got a flashback to sitting in the car listening to you talk about using wedges in the foot. I was like, that's where I knew you from. Okay, got it.
that's
Yes.
it. All
That's
right.
funny.
Well, yeah,
I didn't know what podcast it was. I
I
don't know
won't say
anything.
I'm not the foot guy, but I definitely have a fetish. We'll say I don't know. Yeah. So, so when you're looking at bodies, I'm just curious, like landmark events for you over the last few years here of trying to observe movement. Was there one in particular time where you're watching side by side with your colleagues or whatever, and then you're like, oh my gosh, look at that. I I I'm
Hmm.
seeing something for the first time. Does anything like, and then you're jazzed from that, going, oh, I guess my real question is, what is it? Because you've got a fire in your belly, and it's almost the heat's coming across from coast to coast right now. I can feel it come through the laptop here. So what is it? What's that fire?
Uh, I I don't exactly know if there was a moment where I saw it and it was the spark. I really don't know. I don't know. It's a
Okay.
tough question. Um, I I just love that every single, especially in return to play, which is why it's probably what I've gravitated to the most. Every single person is a new puzzle. And you watch them move and you are trying to solve this puzzle. So I don't know if there was a specific like aha moment, but it's, when you figure it out, it's the best feeling ever because I like to know things. That's just how I am, right? I like to know things. I like to learn. And it's such a challenge when you don't know what's wrong. And it's such a challenge to figure out the plan that will fix it because the human body is complex, but it's not like we're veterinarians. We don't have different animals. We all have
Right.
the, right? We're all dealing with the same animal. So there is a way to figure it out. So, and that's kind of I would say what is so motivating for me. Like how do we solve this puzzle? What what are the problems that you keep seeing, but then don't have the bias that once you see it once, oh, this is what it is. Like, no, that's not what it is. It's not always the same thing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Once you've seen one of
Oh,
them, you've
that's
seen one of them.
okay. So then I guess one of my last questions, I've got a couple, but this one, you're also the assistant strength coach. So you're spending time in the weight room as well as out on the field with the return of performance. So how has your understanding of we'll call it rehab strength training, because I think that's really, I would love for some group like the NSCA to actually formally create a certification for the rehab strength conditioning specialist, because it's going to be quite different. So I'm considering you a rehab strength conditioning specialist who goes into the weight room. How has that perspective changed your approach in the weight room? If so, or is it the other way around?
Uh, I think the biggest shift has been in doing less in the weight room and even less on the field, essentially changing my frequency and my volume and periodization and seeing the giant spikes in performance improvements. So I had an athlete last year and he trained with us the entire off season. And then during OTAs, he had pretty bad, or not during OTAs, during training camp, by the end, he had pretty bad hip impingement. And he was put on injured reserve for the first 4 weeks of the season. So he trained with us for an entire offseason spring. And the way it works in the NFL is you really have to go 4 days in a row based off schedule. You have to go Monday to Thursday, and then you give the guys Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And you repeat week after week. Now, that's not ideal because you're going 4 days in a row. The body does not love training 4 days in a row. So we're pretty creative on the Wednesdays, making them more recovery based, all of these things. But with this particular athlete, he's a freak. He's a tight end. He's 6'5", 250, runs 20 miles an hour. He's a freak. He's has hip impingement. We're in return to play. And I changed the periodization. And instead, we would run on day one, we would lift and jump on day two, we would take day three off, and we would just repeat that cycle. So he ended up doing essentially half as much of each. He'd still warm up every day, but really half as much as each. He ran 21 miles an hour, set a speed PR. He squatted 30 pounds more, back squatted, than he had all summer, even though we weren't chasing strength. And all of his performance metrics are going up. All we're doing is less.
More, less is more.
This
That's awesome.
and especially with this population, they're so freaky. They're so type 2 dominant, right? So fatigue, what does that tell us? CNS fatigue, the first thing that happens is you reduce motor unit recruitment to type 2 muscle fibers. Well, all I did was pull back fatigue and all these things. So I would say something that was really eye-opening to me. Um, really eye-opening. The other uh, something that I will just go stand on a soapbox rant about any day of the week is I think you need to understand the science to then understand the methods or the exercises. Everybody just wants to watch an Instagram video of an exercise and see how it applies, but that doesn't help you. Like you knowing my exercise, you said trade secrets, right? There are no trade secrets. You knowing what I do for exercises doesn't help you in the slightest.
No.
Whereas
The concepts behind it, the methodology, understanding the concepts, then the exercise will make themselves. Just like you're making the exercises based on the concept of what human movement's all about.
exactly, like what problem am I trying to solve? I need to know how to solve the problem scientifically, movement wise, and then it's easy. You just put the exercise to it. But that's something that I'm such a believer of. Like, I can't figure out how to make a recovery program if I don't understand how fatigue works. I can't figure out how to get somebody stronger if I don't understand the mechanisms of strength gain. If I just went and read a book on wave loading, that wouldn't help me. Like, I was like, oh, I got to do wave load. Why? Whatever it is, right? So I I don't know that necessarily. It's like, oh, I learned this and as a recovery strength or a rehab strength coach, and that's why I'm better as a strength coach. But I do think sometimes the problems you run into, because every single person is a puzzle, you then end up taking a deep dive into something that is eye-opening for everything else. So that rolling 3-day periodization is from your Dan Mendegucha. That's how he rehabs hamstrings. So I was like, well, I have another guy with a hamstring. I'm going to put you on the same like split essentially. We're going to try this out. You're still going to get good quality work. And then all of a sudden I was like, maybe everybody should be on this rolling 3-day split. And then Snyder comes as a consultant and talks, and you know what he does? A rolling 3-day split. That's almost exactly the same. Huh.
So good. Oh my gosh, dude, I think we could keep on going. Honestly, if we were in some sports bar right now, they'd have to close the door and kick us out eventually. It'd be by midnight and we'd just still be chatting away. So I definitely, when summer camp rolls around or whatever, we can take on volume 2 and come back and talk about it, because I love what you're doing there with the Panthers. And hey, if people want to follow you on Instagram, or you got a page on LinkedIn, but what's your preference for social media if they can follow you?
I'm Barbeau Training, so my last name Barbeau Training on Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. You've got a side gig too. You've got a private consulting company. So in the off season, you train the athletes, or what?
I used to, but more so when I was interning and stuff. Now it's
Too
I
busy.
don't even think my website still works, but it was great when I didn't have any money, and I was like helping train some. It was called TMX. It was like kind of like not CrossFitty, but kind of like a shorter Spartan race type deal. So that I made a little bit of money on the side doing that. Now I'm just happy to talk to anybody that wants to reach out and talk about training.
Well, I'm glad you answered my call, and I really appreciate it. This has been so good. I can't thank you for coming on enough.
Phenomenal. It's great.
Man, what a great conversation that was. Yeah, we're at the end this week, but don't worry. Every Monday, we got a great show lined up, and just like this one. Thank you, Tom and the Panthers, for making this happen. Remember, you can always go to my website if you want some inside information about what I do, blogs, podcast archives, continuing education online, in person. Just go to rockysnyder.com. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Remember, Satanta College is where you can go for your master's or bachelor's degree. And check out my book, Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. We'll see you next week.